I want to thank you for bringing me into your meeting today, and I would love to spend a few minutes with you and talk to you and invite you into a project. It's a project that is giving me more hope about our world and our world's future than anything I've worked on. It's a project that might be the most important project I've ever worked on. And it's a project that could affect the lives of millions and millions of children in a positive way, in a deeply positive way. My name is David Cooperrider. I'm a professor at Case Western Reserve University. I teach in the School of Management and Leadership. I'm author of a book called Appreciative Inquiry, A Positive Revolution and Change. And I'm coming to you today in collaboration with two institutions that are beginning to kind of help form and shape this and lead this effort. The first is the Meyerson Foundation in Cincinnati, the Meyerson Foundation and the Meyerson Academy. Tremendous leaders in character strengths in schools, and I'm going to come back to a little bit about their work in a bit. And then the second key partner here is the Champlain College, the Bob Stiller School of Business, the David L. Cooperrider Center for Appreciative Inquiry. So just a little bit more on my passion and my background, because I think it'll help you understand where we're heading with this whole thing. But for the past 30 years, my focus has been on studying successful, very successful change and developing the tools and methods and so on. But not just successful change, but literally, but more importantly, thinking about change at the scale of the whole. That seems to be the real agenda of our day. When I speak with top leaders in almost any industry or the United Nations or corporations like Apple, there obviously change is incredibly important in all our schools and hospitals and so on. But I think the senior leadership question has shifted. It's no longer a question simply about change, but it's change at the scale of the whole. How do we move a whole 67,000 person telecommunications company together? How do we move a whole Northeast Ohio economic region together? How do we move a whole state of Massachusetts to overcome all of the polarizations and begin to develop a common ground vision of a renewable energy future together? I think that's the real question of change. It's the real question of change in our school systems as well. And in so many quarters, when we think about systemic change, there's a sense of despair. Think about how so many of us feel in terms of our politics. How are we going to move together? That's kind of a central agenda of our day. It's been exciting as we've developed tools like the Appreciative Inquiry Summit methodology. It's a methodology for doing planning and designing and strategic level change work with the whole system in the room, all the different stakeholders in a very inclusive way. And what we're discovering is that it brings out the best in human systems. Somehow, between the appreciative inquiry process and somehow with wholeness, the whole system in the room, we're able to work just incredible projects at a level of scale that, quite frankly, my sense of hope about what we're capable of doing goes up every time we're part of one of these efforts. So these appreciative inquiry summits have been used at Apple and Johnson & Johnson. I can remember a few years ago when the head of the United States Navy, Admiral Clark, the CNO, Chief Naval Officer, called Frank Barrett and myself. Frank Barrett's one of my colleagues, and we went to the Pentagon, and he said, I heard about this appreciative inquiry, whole system in the room, and how it brings out the best so quickly and with real collective action. And he said, do you really think we could do strategic planning in the Navy, with an E-5 sailors sitting with 3-star admirals and 500 to 1,000 people coming to consensus and common ground? And we said yes, and we shared examples and shared the books, and he said, let's do it. And so soon after that first success, they developed a center in the Navy to foster this kind of multi-stakeholder planning and designing and design thinking together. Kofi Annan a few years ago when he was Secretary General of the United Nations, and wanting to push the pedal to the floor on eradicating extreme poverty in the world. And he's saying in the back of his mind, there's no way we're going to do that unless we have great business models and entrepreneurship and economic empowerment and dignified work. So he was assembling 700 to 1,000 of the top CEOs in the world to unite the strengths of markets with those kind of agenda items. And he said, David, do you think we could use appreciative inquiry to redo the way we do world summits? You know, usually world summits are talking heads or pre-negotiated agreements, but not collaborative planning. And so, you know, what a privilege it was to bring a team together to work with him on this effort. Today, there's 8,000 corporations that continue the work of this, what's called now the United Nations Global Compact. I mention all that to you. Bob Stiller at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, it used appreciative inquiry to bring customers into the room, to bring supply chain partners, bring farmers from all different parts of the world growing coffee, to say, let's plan together and let's design together. So just a lot of exciting work happening. I share that with you because there's another source of hope that I have, and a few years ago, I call it a positive revolution in research in the human sciences, and it really is tectonic. And what happened was, in about year 2000, is Marty Seligman, he was president of the American Psychological Association. You know, hundreds and thousands of researchers working on our study of the human sciences. And what was clear to Marty, and what he noticed, is that for the last 100 years or so, psychology and all the humans have been focused on human deficiency and what's wrong with the human being. So we've learned a lot about depression and codependency and anger and fear and on and on and on. And he started, as we, you know, there was one statistic that I read or heard where out of 44,000 journal articles, 98.9% of those were on what's wrong with the human being, the studies of anger and fear and depression. And we didn't have any studies of hope, inspiration, and joy. And so Marty said, let's at least have a 50-50. Let's create a positive psychology that's focusing on what gives life to the human being and what are the characteristics of the good life, and how do we propel people beyond just, you know, a negative state to flourishing and thriving in their full potential. Anyway, many of you know about that field that's been emerged, and I just have to say the knowledge generation and the good science is enormous. My whole bookshelf is completely different over what it was a few years ago. I have to say it's just like a sea change has happened. And now all of this theoretical and academic work is being turned into tremendous resources and tools. For example, Barbara Fredrickson's book should be on the bookshelf of every family. She's a real precise scientist, and she starts studying, you know, positive emotional intelligence and what happens to our intelligence and our capacity to relate when we feel hope, when we feel inspiration, when we feel joy. You know, what good are positive emotions? Well, it turns out they're very, very important to human development. Another great book, you know, Carol Dweck's book on growth mindset versus fixed mindsets, and how so many young people and adults have this fixed mindset that, oh, we can't, you know, we're born, but she's showing with a growth mindset how much more potential. Or Marty's early work on optimism and learned optimism, and how we can train and develop, and all the work on emotional and social emotional intelligence, Richard Boyatzis's work, that just shows how profoundly we can shape great groups and great teams and so on. So there's tons of work happening. One that I think is going to be classic is the one that Neil Mayerson catalyzed with his, you know, he helped fund a major research effort around the world to lift up a kind of an encyclopedia of human strengths. This encyclopedia of human strengths is quite important. Chris Peterson and Marty authored it, and it lists all the human strengths of wisdom and courage and integrity and curiosity, and on and on. And more than that, what the Meyerson Foundation has done after all that academic work is it's created a website where anybody in the world for free can get in touch with their 3 or 4 signature strengths. And then how the data shows how when you craft your education and your life around those signature strengths, what kind of flourishing begins to occur. And they've stewarded this, and it's for free. And it's just one example of all of the tools. Another one that I just love is Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. She's at Harvard and in the School of Education, an endowed chair there. And her book called Portraiture, and it's a portraits of the good schools. Again, lifting up not just individual psychological, but the organization dimensions of great school systems where teachers can thrive and flourish and so on. And all of this is so important, and a sea change has happened. And one of the, a privilege that I had was then Marty and I were invited together to go to Australia. Again, he's the father of the positive psychology field, and my area is on not just the individual level, but more positive institutions, more fully human organizations, and where people can flourish and thrive and realize their potentials. And so we were asked to do 11 speeches across the country, Marty focusing on the individual and me focusing on the institution, and the response was so powerful. And then we visited some schools that Marty helped catalyze in terms of real pioneering work in the educational field with positive education. Geelong Grammar School and St. Peter's College in Australia. And we started seeing so much potential, and one of the ministers of education could sense the potential of maybe raising this as a national level discussion. And I felt like the timing was right in our own country as well, and other countries. Mexico is really doing some tremendous work. And so Marty and I started talking. He said, but Dave, we don't really have the tools for moving whole systems. This requires an acceleration. Maybe we could use the Appreciative Inquiry Summit methodology. So that's where that discussion began to think about, can we pioneer a national level kind of summit to really move things forward? John Dewey said, education is not preparation for life, that education is life. It's just so important, and what positive education does is it places a high priority on well-being, on flourishing, on psychological and social intelligence, on the capacity to develop character strengths, so well-being and flourishing of the student, as well as the academics. And what's happening, lo and behold, as in these experiments in this book called Evidence-Based Approaches to Positive Education, what's occurring is that as human flourishing goes up, then guess what happens to math, reading, and writing as well. The other part of it is also, it says that a teacher's ability to flourish is important to a child's ability to flourish, and a teacher's ability to flourish is dependent also on having an institution that flourishes, institutions that are fully human in a developmental sense. And so my premise is also that as we discover and design more positive workplaces like we've done at places like Johnson & Johnson, well, why couldn't that be done also with schools? Because the premise is, as the institution becomes more of a workplace where you can flourish, then so too will that spread through the classroom and the teacher and so on. And obviously every institution in society, has a moral obligation, a real moral obligation to promote human flourishing. And none more so than those responsible for educating young people, especially our families and our schools. So the question before us is simply this: how might we unite the very, very best in education today, use an appreciative inquiry, lift up all the best practices and breakthroughs that are happening in education in general, and link all of these innovations with the best in the field of positive psychology and all the resources and so on? And how do we accelerate all of this to make these extraordinary resources that are there, like the VIA Strength Survey. It's there. It's so simple to bring to the world with such profound database behind it. So how do we unite and bring that together? The fact is this, we have, when you think of all of human history, we have an unprecedented opportunity. We have an unprecedented opportunity to have the best educational systems that the world has ever known in all the history of humankind. Think about all that seriously, all the scientific knowledge that's available, all the new learning theories and spreading of best practices, connectivity and the digital explosion and what that means to link schools and cultures and to bring the whole world together through connectivity in the classroom. All the new knowledge that's happening on human flourishing, like an acronym PERMA brings a lot of it together. P stands for positive human experiences. E stands for engagement, where we are truly engaged, our hearts and our minds. R stands for high quality relatedness and relationships and group formation. M stands for lives of meaning and purpose beyond, with something greater than ourselves. And A stands for accomplishment. Well, anyway, I'm going over it quickly, but there's just so many resources to help ignite this perma-flourishing process. And yet, in spite of this unprecedented opportunity, in the US, for example, just think about depression, and the rising rates of depression. Some say it's at an epidemic level, and not just depression, but suicidal depression, even deeper. There's 12 million of our young people in schools today that report that they don't have any, and maybe one teacher who knows them well. Think about that. 12 million children that say, I don't have any or maybe one teacher that knows me well, cares about me, sees my signature strengths. 40% of our children today are not engaged. Their minds are elsewhere. Maybe it's partly the curriculum, maybe it's the distractions in the media, but they're not engaged in the task at hand. 55% of our teachers report not being engaged and in many cases disengaged after so many battles over budgets and school cuts and the sense that we have no voice in our school system itself. Rising stress levels, 25 million children, you can see the rising stress levels. And school systems, whole school systems, our urban school systems, lots of them being abandoned, at least in terms of tax base and so on. So anyway, that discussion with Marty was precious. The whole idea that maybe it's time to create an action-oriented, a design-oriented, collective action kind of whole system in the room summit to bring all of this together. And right now the topic or the way we're framing it, and this will go through revision with the steering committee and so on, but a starting topic is accelerating the future of positive education, coming together to unite the best in education with the best in the positive psychology of human strengths, a National Appreciative Inquiry Summit for Advancing Positive Education. So in any kind of summit, like let me share an example. We worked with the dairy industry. The dairy industry is very polluting, a lot of climate change issues, a lot of CO2 runoff into the streams and the rivers and so on. So there was a desire to bring the whole industry together, farmers and corporations and trucking industries, policymakers, regulators, young people coming into the farming industry and farming world. And we worked with them to develop their long-term sustainability framework, for example, reducing greenhouse gases and so on. But more than that, as they came together, they gave birth to 25 working groups, some at a policy level, some at a technical level, like let's experiment with biodigesters and turn all this waste into wealth and into fuel and so on. So 25 working groups come out of this thing, and pretty soon the working prototypes are so exciting and powerful that it attracts $258 million to support those experiments. And then, after a couple years, this is just last year then, the White House hosted us all, the whole industry, to kind of say and point to that industry and say, this is an industry that knows how to move together. And it was very exciting. I loved being part of it. It was an honor. But the real point I'm trying to make is that in this summit, you're going to come out with this kind of collective action capability. And so there's 3 phases to any piece of work like this. The pre-summit phase, where you have a steering committee. In this case, it's probably going to be 75 to 150 people, a cross-section of people, coming together to create the framework for the summit, the title for the summit, and then the stakeholder mix that's going to create magic, the stakeholder mix that's going to bring out the best in the system, including stakeholders from other countries who have best practices in Norway or Denmark or Mexico. You bring all the universe of strengths together, and then you do the summit, and the summit can be anywhere between 500 to 1,000 people. We've got some software technology that if we had a face-to-face group of, let's say, 1,000, then we can use the software process where people all over the country can participate in the design process. And then it's the post-summit work. And again, we pay real special attention to action and innovation, where you come out of it with rapid prototypes. In one part of the AI Summit, the Appreciative Inquiry Summit, goes through discovery, dream, and then the design phase. We take a page out of the book of some of the top design firms in the world, like IDEO or the Apple Design Studios, where you actually develop the rapid prototypes that create the traction going forward. So what can come out of a summit? I think a movement can come out of the summit. I sense an urge on the part of a lot of leaders to lift up our potential to create the finest educational systems that we're capable of creating, you know. Edison once said, we'd literally astonish ourselves if we did everything we're capable of doing. And that's true in this case. We're going to come out with real action. So people are tired of going to conferences where there's such a good dialogue and conversation and so many good ideas, but then no action. And there's a conference fatigue. Well, Appreciative Inquiry Summit goes way beyond that conference fatigue because it moves into this design phase. I anticipate that we'll come out of the summit with 20-some working groups, really significant ones, on policy, on teacher curriculum, on things like, well, I could see a big school system like Chicago or Houston Independent School System raising their hand saying, make us a pilot, let's really take it seriously in this school system and then spread everything we learn. So anyway, a world-class advisory board is already forming. It's telling me that the timing is ripe. There is a readiness and the resources and so on to accelerate this positive education, as well as the positive institutions of the school systems itself. So, of course, Marty Seligman, the father of positive psychology, is said, yes, sign me up. I want to be part of this. The research is there. This is a really incredible opportunity. Neil Mayerson, who was the pioneer in the character strengths work, and Jillian Darwish, the executive director at the Mayerson Academy. They bring such talent and such understanding of schools and school systems and years and years and years of work of helping to bring this kind of work into the classroom. PhD folks from Harvard, like Marge Schiller, just an amazing force for positive education for children, and written books. And New York Times bestseller Tom Rath, his books are spreading and being used by some of the top corporations in the world. Again, a New York Times bestseller on all the StrengthsFinder work. James Pawlowski, he's the executive director of the World Congress on Positive Psychology and the International Positive Psychology Association. Barbara Fredrickson is the president of that association. Again, one of the very, very top scientists. I hope everybody gets to meet her someday. She's just a genuine gift to the world. Lindsay Gotwin, she's the faculty director of the David L. Cooperrider Center for Appreciative Inquiry at Champlain. And she and her husband Matt have been spearheading a lot of great experimental work in schools and writing and books and so on. James O'Shaughnessy, he is the executive director out of London of the International Positive Education Network. They're holding a big meeting to share a lot of the findings that are coming out. That meeting is going to be this summer in Dallas, and so look that up if you're interested in it. It's called IPEN, International Positive Education Network, and a great coming together of all the knowledge base in this field. Business leaders like Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, again, a major pioneer in large group planning with appreciative inquiry, huge successes in the corporation, but you know, they bring customers into the room for the planning, supply chain partners, coffee growers from every part of the world to have full voice and to bring all the knowledge together to create and envision a better future. Whole Foods, the chief legal counsel there, uses appreciative inquiry, and Whole Foods obviously has a huge commitment to our schools. I'm setting up a meeting with Harvard's, one of my idols is Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. Her book called Portraiture, where she's developing portraits of the good schools, is just enormously important and needs to be brought into this work in a big way. So, you know, let me just say that I'd love to invite you in as a thought partner. And I think this is a task of historic opportunity and importance. I think it's the kind of work where we'll say at the end of our lives, I know for me it's certainly true, I think we'll say, you know, my life had meaning because I was part of that project. And I think that's telling. So it's just a couple ways that you can help us. Help us identify key stakeholders. Again, the room needs to be filled with regulators and superintendents and top principals and school systems that want to move in this direction, and business leaders and the faith community, design firms. Think about stakeholders in terms of a mix that can create real power with information, with creativity, with a commitment to the best in education. Help us think about celebrities, for example, or funders or investors. Jalen Rose, for example, the NBA star out of Detroit, is doing amazing work with schools and lifting up through optimism and hope the best in these children. Help us think about corporations who care. One of my experiences is that business leaders get it. You know, they say, this is so important for my own child. You know, I want teachers who can see the best in that child. I want teachers who can lift up the true, the good, the better, the possible, and help make exciting learning and leads to wellness and well-being and a thriving kind of atmosphere in the schools. Help us make this available to other countries. Our intention, again, is to work it at a national level because of all the context and culture and specificity involved in educational systems. But we want to give away all the tools and all the knowledge that's created through this project. Help us unite with top thought leaders in education. And be part of our community. You know, there's alliances that we're bringing into this, like the World Community on Appreciative Inquiry, and there's many facilitators that can help bring this to other countries and local regions. Alliances like Peter Senge's SOL, Society for Organizational Learning. There's a lot of gifted facilitators, people who can help move this forward at more local levels as well. Let me just end by saying, again, at a personal level, I think that this might be the most important piece of work that I've been involved with, and I've been involved with some really, really exciting and impactful things. But I feel like we have the opportunity to affect the lives of millions of children, and it's all there. The timing is right. And I love Pablo Casal's the celloist, I love his comment. And he said, you know, what we should be teaching them is what they are. You know, you are a marvel. You are unique in all the world. There's no other child that exactly like you. And in the millions of years that have passed, there has never been another child exactly like you. You may become a Shakespeare, a Michelangelo, a Martin Luther King, a Beethoven. You have the capacity for anything. And yes, you are a marvel.